Good evening. I'm Kathleen Perino, Executive Director of Episcopal Impact Fund. Thank you for joining us tonight for the second of our three-part webinar on social justice, poverty, and impact. We've reserved 10 minutes for questions and answers at the end of this webinar. At any time during the presentation, please type your questions into the Q&A window in the Zoom tool panel. We will share your questions with the panel as time permits. Our first session in this three-part session focused on gaining cultural competency and level setting. If you weren't able to attend that session, a recording is available on our website at episcopalimpact.org. Tonight, we will turn to a closer examination of the intersection of race, class, and poverty. Again, our conversation will be moderated by Robert Greene, founder and CEO of Cedar and Burwell Strategic Consulting. Robert's work focuses on organizational development, culture change, diversity and inclusion planning and strategy, cultural competency, and systemic integration of diversity, equity, and inclusion frameworks across all facets of organizations. Robert resides in San Francisco with his wife, a nationally renowned educator, and their two sons. He earned undergraduate and graduate degrees from Brown and Harvard, respectively. He has served on the Board of Advisors for Sponsors for Educational Opportunity Scholars Program, the Board of the Bay Area Discovery Museum, the Board of Directors of One Purpose Charter School, and is civically engaged throughout the Bay Area. On our panel this evening is Michelle L. Miles-Chambers, Senior Program Officer for the FACE Initiative at the San Francisco Foundation. Michelle's personal calling for being part of the universe is to work with faith communities. She lives by Marian Wright Edelman's philosophy: service to others is simply the price we pay for living. Michelle grew up in a community where there were no sidewalks, no services, and major safety concerns. Her grandparents were part of Oakland community organizations where she began organizing, educating the community of their rights to demand the same services for a low-income community of color as for an all-white upper-class community. Social justice, racial and economic equity are core values for Michelle and her husband of 35 years, the Reverend Ken Chambers. She is a parent of 4 adults and 4 grandchildren. They regularly volunteer in the community and provide pro bono grant writing to congregations and faith-based institutions. Michelle serves on the board of the Sisters of St. Joseph's Healthcare Foundation and is a member of the Episcopal Impact Fund Program Committee. She's still active in the West Oakland community that sparked her activism, organizing, movement building more than 40 years ago. Jose Quinones is the founding CEO of Mission Asset Fund and a visiting professor at UC Berkeley in the Department of City and Regional Planning. Mission Asset Fund is an award-winning nonprofit with innovative nationwide models for integrating financially excluded low-income communities into the financial mainstream. For his work, Jose was awarded the MacArthur Fellowship, the Ashoka Fellowship, and the Aspen Institute Fellowship. He also received the James Irvine Leadership Award, Princeton School of Public and International Affairs Distinguished Alumni Award, and the San Francisco Business Times Most Admired CEO Award, among others. Jose is a visionary leader, highly regarded in the consumer finance field. He currently serves on the consumer advisory boards for the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, US Bank, Experian, and Capital One. Jose graduated from the University of California at Davis and the Princeton School for Public and International Affairs. We are really thrilled to have such an outstanding panel for our webinar today. And now I'd like to turn the evening over to our moderator, Robert Greene. Thank you, Robert.
Good evening, Kathleen. Thank you so much for the warm introduction. I am completely excited tonight, and I hope you are as well as our audience. I've been looking forward to this conversation for weeks now, and I can't believe we're finally here. I can't wait to get into a conversation with Michelle and Jose that in many ways extends the work that we were doing last month when we had a brilliant panel with Reverend Lindy Bunch and Mr. Aaron Mullen, really thinking about how we develop cultural competency, how we can apply it in our everyday lives. We were grounding ourselves in a brilliant piece of scholarship by Dolly Chugg entitled The Person You Mean to Be. And part of what Lindy and Aaron were exploring with us and really helping us come to grips with is the intentionality with which we have to move into our space to develop cultural competency, in part so that we can be better assets in our community, so we can be better citizens, more engaged, and quite honestly, so we can play our own role in helping to bring an experience of humanity and respect and dignity to everybody with whom we encounter, particularly in the Bay Area. Well, tonight, we're going to extend that. We have brilliant practitioners and brilliant just scholars and researchers about how we have to put our own cultural competency skills into practice, but more importantly, to do that in a systemic way. And I think if there's any word that will probably characterize this evening's conversation, it is systems. Knowing the way that Michelle and Jose approach their work, undoubtedly we're going to be enriched by the way that they talk about how we have to think not just about the individual, but more importantly, we have to think at the systemic level as well. And undoubtedly, one of the things that they're going to say is that it's really the systems in which we're operating that will shape the experiences of populations. So if you want to know what is going on, you have to examine the systems. And in fact, as Barry Richmond once said, every system is perfectly designed to produce the results that it does, whether intentionally or not. So we are going to be incredibly intentional tonight about continuing our conversation, about continuing our work as an Episcopal Impact Fund, investing the time to make us more the person that we need to be, so that we can be an agent for change and an agent for growth and health across every person, every community member here in the Bay Area. They're our neighbors, and we want to make sure that everybody feels that they are welcome, that they are supported, so they can be the fullest and best selves possible. Enough of me talking here. I can't wait to get in this conversation. So without further ado, I would love to bring forth Michelle Miles Chambers. As Kathleen told us, she is doing incredible work, a native right here in the Bay Area, and I am sure that you're going to enjoy the conversation with her as much as I will, and as much as Jose will. Michelle, please welcome to the stage. And Michelle, come on out.
Well,
welcome.
Good evening. Thank you.
It is great to see you. And before we get started, you know I have to bring your co-conspirator out here and turntabling, turning the tables and flipping the script on how we really think about all the systems and connections that we need to incorporate to make sure that we are addressing poverty in a permanent way. Jose Quinones, where are you, my friend?
Right here.
Welcome, 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 welcome. Now listen, before we get started, you have to tell me a little bit about the song, because this was the gift that you all have dropped on us tonight. Tell us a little bit about this turntabling here. I mean, I love Janelle Monáe, but why tonight? Why are we thinking about turntabling as a foundation, as a tone setter for this evening?
Well, I'll start and then I'll let Jose pitch in. First of all, you know, I'm a child of the 60s, love vinyl, remember when my grandmother did 78s, and thought that this particular video turntable was very appropriate, particularly when we're talking about poverty and race, because in order to alleviate poverty, we have to turn the table on policies that are striking the community members down. And then when you add race into the equation and you intersect all of those things, you have to turn the tables. It just absolutely has to be done. And she was able to capture everything in that small video around the environment, around policy, around how poverty and systems take place and how they manipulate your mind and make you not want to like yourself, or perhaps make you do things that you're not supposed to do. You don't have the same opportunities that other people do. But at the end of the day, we can exercise our voice by participating in our democratic policy around voting. And so I just thought this was the perfect segue to really start this conversation.
I could not agree more. I mean, that's a powerful statement, and I love how, you know, folks are using culture, music, imagery in such an empowering way. And then the idea of turning the tables around, I mean, to end with this imagery of like the goddess coming from the water, I mean, it was just amazing, you know, and that is about going back, reclaiming identity, reclaiming history, reclaiming who we are as a people, and I totally saw that. And I think it's about standing on the giants, you know, that came before us. I mean, the imageries of all those icons of, you know, leaders, civil rights leaders, you know, I mean, Angela Davis was there. Who wasn't on that video? I mean, it was amazing, but it was really about noting how we are all standing on their shoulders, and how can we not say that now after the election? You know, after this past election, we have to thank, you know, Black voters for showing up and making sure that, you know, Georgia, you know, flipping Georgia was amazing. Why? Because Black voters organized like never before, and they turned that state around. In the same way that, you know, Latino voters turned Arizona around in such a beautiful, beautiful way. And you know, same thing with you know, with Nevada. I mean, this is where people of color really definitely showed up and turned things around. So, and I think this type of video is sort of reclaims that narrative, that so that it can be an empowering moment for the people that actually showed up to vote. So thank you, Michelle, for starting us off with that note. That was quite amazing.
Of course. Music is the universal
we so
language.
Appreciate this. Absolutely. We so appreciate you two for gifting us with that. I've been excited about this conversation for weeks now, and I want you all just to set us up a little bit here, because we're talking about this intersectionality of race and class, and using the intersectionality of those two constructs to really, I think, a more powerful lens to what poverty is, why it occurs, why it persists, and what are our real leverage points to address it. You know, how do we step in and bring some solutions? How do we turn the tables on some of the conditions that we see in the Bay Area and elsewhere? How do we do that? Michelle, can you start us off?
Of course. So I want to start off with a quote from the remarkable Toni Morrison. And she says, "The role of freedom is to free someone else. The role of freedom is to free somebody else." And so all of us actually can participate in playing that role by continuing to knock down the systems that will alleviate individuals from becoming into poverty. So I'm talking about my experience as a Black woman who grew up here in the Bay Area. I'm an Oakland native, and my parents were teenagers when I was born. However, this particular system of poverty, it started way before I came about, or my parents came about. We have to really go back to the origin of labor in this country. So you have labor, and who do you use for labor in this country? You take individuals from their native countries as enslavement, and then they're treated as pieces of property. And then, which is capitalism, it's capitalism. And so you create a system that is not equitable, and it's not even level for individuals to seek the necessary tools and skills to be able to support themselves and their family. And so how do you recreate a system after it's been established for 300 plus years without tearing down the policies that are in place? So we have to deal with the systemic changes that need to happen at all levels. I'm talking about local government, county government, state government, federal government. because it was a trickle down effect that happened that created this. And because when you put poverty and then you put race into the equation, you know, it's just like, okay, it's a double whammy. And I'm not saying that there are not individuals in poverty that don't have European descent, because if you look at Appalachia and the population in Appalachia, it's 90% white, and that is a very, very poor community. So that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that we have to deal with the systems, and EIF is trying to deal with the systems, but we have to become political. You know, there's no such thing as not being political and trying to alleviate poverty. It just don't go hand in hand. There are situations and policies that are in place that have been in place for hundreds of years. And the only way to really deal with this is to deal with really the intentionality of trying to keep communities of color, Black communities down from achieving what needs to be achieved through labor, through fair employment, through fair services. I can go back to, I'm reminded of a movie that I loved to see in the 70s. It was Claudine. And it was for entertainment, but it really talked about the system that was established to help families, which I'm talking about the welfare system. But that system really was created to alleviate the father and the male from the home. Because if you needed assistance to care for your family, you could not have a man in the home. What type of system would do that? I mean, even if we talk about when we were enslaved, the separation of families, we're talking about many, many hundreds of years of policies in this country that was intentional for families to not come together and for poor people in poverty to not be able to lift themselves up with the tools that are necessary to move forward. It's not about the bootstrap. It's about having the tools, creating the toolkit to move forward.
Michelle, thank you. There's so much that you're saying here. Jose, here's a link that I
can hear you, Robert.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now I can.
Concept of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. And one of the interesting things in the scholarship that we were looking at last week is Dolly Chugg was intentional about telling us how we should really kind of deconstruct that mythology, right? So it's really hard to pull yourself up by your bootstraps if you don't have bootstraps, right? And so we think that it's up to the individual to do it. And, you know, a lot of times, you know, people just don't have the systems and the wherewithal, the resources in place through no fault of their own, right? So a lot of wealth was created through the GI Bill. We look at, you know, this notion of access to capital to run a small business. And people say, well, hey, if you're determined, you can do it. But Jose, you know, tell us a little bit about how we have to continue to deconstruct that mythology, that individuals are solely responsible for the outcomes that they're able to.
Right. So that's definitely a big question, and I think we have to start there, right? Because systems are built around stories. You know, societies are built around mythologies. You know, myths. You know, the symbols that we create as a people, right, throughout time. And then we definitely have this notion of the most deserving, right? That we want to help people that we deem most deserving, or those individuals that, as a society, think deserve our help. And that you know, that definition of who deserves our help has changed, you know, through time, right? I mean, after the Civil War, you know, we thought that only the widows of soldiers that fought in the Civil War, you know, were deserving of getting public assistance. And so that's how, you know, a lot of these programs started by, you know, saying like, well, let's start with this group of people, but then that definition expanded. But to me, the idea of the most deserving, has always pinned one group of people from the other, when in fact we all need help at different times, at different points of our lives, right? I mean, we come into this world completely helpless, right? Completely helpless from, and we need a lot of assistance, and it changes, throughout time. So, but the idea that we have to really go after is this idea that, that we are essentially blaming poverty on the poor. We are blaming poverty on the people themselves by saying or insinuating that the poverty is their fault because they're too lazy, or they're too stupid, or they just don't know enough, or they're doing everything wrong, right? They're buying too many lattes. I mean, literally, there was a study done that literally said, if people just stop buying lattes from Starbucks, then they can turn things around. And it was sort of ridiculous, right? But it kind of goes into this mythology that we've created as in society, that somehow poverty is really the fault of the poor. Now, and that is, that idea is still there, it's still very prevalent, because the opposite we hold dear, which is the wealth is somewhat, a sign of God's grace. I am wealthy, I am successful, I have succeeded, I am this, I am that. And because of that, somehow that is a sign, that God's that I'm in God's favor or in some way, right? And we've definitely developed that notion, and people love it, right? People, that's how they think that they can, articulate or justify, their wealth, their position of power, their position of influence, because somehow it's a divine right or divinely intervened or something. Well, the other side of that is, again, if you're poor, then you're not, in God's grace. Somehow it's your fault. And I think we have to sort of attack those notions, because, all of our systems, all of our, systems that are still perpetuating, poverty, really, to my mind, stem from those ideas. And in that perpetuation, it wasn't not just about the GI Bill or those laws or the redlining in the 20s or all those historical, injustices, right? It is so, but some of those are happening right now, like today. I mean, just more recently, and this is the one I mention a lot, which is, there was a moment, in our country months ago where we thought through this pandemic, through this economic crisis, it's important for government to step in and provide people with cash, with direct cash assistance, because we knew, this economic crisis was going to hit people hard, and it is hitting people hard. And so government did the right thing in terms of providing people with direct cash. And this is through the CARES Act. But through the CARES Act, they explicitly excluded 15 million people from receiving assistance. 50 million people said, nope, not you. Everybody else except you. We're not going to give you cash, even though you're paying into the tax base, even though you're an essential worker, even though you're working in industries that we need in order to keep our economy going, you're not going to receive any assistance. So the injustices are still being perpetuated today, not just historically, but we're definitely building on that. And I think we cannot fight the historical ones, even the current ones, when we still have this idea that poverty is somewhat the fault of the poor, and somehow my own success and my own wealth is divinely, granted, and thus, worthy of praise. And I think we need to attack both of those things.
That's an incredibly important point. And that image that you all called to mind earlier about standing on the shoulders of giants. I always think about that, because you're absolutely right. None of us can do this on our own. And so, part of what I think we're always fighting against is also a bit of the mythology of individual success, of an individualistic culture, as opposed to being more collectivist. Kind of the Horatio Alger mythology that, individual agency is the sole determinant. And so I don't think I'm hearing you say that people don't have a responsibility to do the most that they can. But somehow I think it has to be more than just individual agency. When we look at all the small headwinds and tailwinds that will accrue to either make something harder for some or make it easier for others, right? So Michelle, say a little bit more if you can about how do we balance some of the energy, particularly in, in these multiple pandemics? How do we balance some of the energy of helping people think that it's still right to help others while I'm in the midst of still struggling myself? That's some of the tension that, I think we're hearing in this country. Connect some of those ideas for us where, we recognize that it's in all of our interests to make sure as many people can thrive as possible. Am I asking that well?
No, that's perfectly well. So, we have to give from the overflow. If we have overflow, we have to be able to share that. We also have to, again, I'm always going to go back to systems. And I'm gonna say the word that probably nobody wants to say. We're talking about poverty and race, but you can't have poverty and race, and let's just be bold, unless you talk about white supremacy. It just, you just can't do it. Because if you think about, you have to tie in the logic of, the racial hierarchy that's existing in this country and that has existed. And again, I'm going back to the desire for labor, which equals slavery, and then the desire for land, which equals genocide. And then you have capitalism, and then you have a group of community members who are cast in a certain way by the systems that are set up for folks who have, in essence, really colonized the United States of America and have created systems so that families and individuals are going to continue to stay down. And so how can we combat that? What are some of the solutions? The one solution, and we have seen that through this particular election, is continuing to educate our community members that they have a voice, and there are many ways that they can exercise their voice. You must do advocacy on the policies that need to be changed for the implementation to create an equitable society where everyone feels like they belong to the community. You have to continue to do community organizing, continue to do movement building, and create different avenues for folks to be able to exercise their voice. Voting is one of the most powerful ways to exercise your voice, but we all know all of our community members don't have the option to vote. So there are many ways where we can do advocacy. What I tell all of my elected officials, you actually work for me because my taxpayer dollars actually pay your salary. So I need you to listen to us so that we can do some implementation, holding our city council members accountable, holding our school board members accountable, holding our state officers accountable, holding our federal officers accountable, because we have to make change. They're at the avenues where they are implementing policy that's not good for us. We have to be intentional about creating change, making change for individuals that are in poverty, particularly communities of color. And I'm talking about Black communities, Indigenous communities, and Latinx communities. Those are the ones that have been hurt the most. And we saw that during this pandemic, and we're seeing it now. We are back up with large numbers. There are still not sites where we can all get tested for free in low-income communities. There may be a few. There are still not beds at hospitals if we need some assistance in regards to move us through, what we're doing. My son has COVID. I happen to have insurance. I happen to be a very boisterous person who advocates, so he was able to receive the necessary services he needed to receive. But what if everyone is not like that? We have to ensure that the policies are in place, and the people have to be able to go out to ensure that we change those policies. So folks have to know their voice, know that they have a voice, continue the community organizing, join a group, because look, we have to make change. Change has to happen now.
Absolutely. We've got to turn the tables. Jose, I want you to take me in a little bit of a different direction here, because I was really vibing on the way that you wove a long narrative, but in particular, how you were still able to focus in on some current policies and current practices. And part of what I can imagine is that there are some people out there thinking, wow, I just didn't know that. You know, how do we continue to educate ourselves about current practices that might even be facially neutral, but will still likely produce and perpetuate inequity, right? What does it look like to go beyond, you know, the long history and be a really critical consumer of how equitable some things are now? And that can be something down the street. It could be a ballot initiative. It could be, you know, anything. How do we continue to educate ourselves so that we're not unintentionally perpetuating the same kind of conditions that we say we want to eradicate?
Yeah, I mean, that's it's a great question. And I think that, again, for me, you know, besides those particular instances that you kind of mentioned, I think it's about that we first have to have a new story to tell. You know, we have to have a new story to tell about who we are as a country, in a new story that can be an inclusive, where in a story where we can, you know, all see ourselves, you know, in that story as where we belong, and that we matter in that story, because that story will be what we can use as our guiding principles to know when an injustice is coming our way or not. You know, because, you know, right now, you know, we don't even know, you know, that something is bad because we don't know how to evaluate that. You know, so because we don't have the right tools, the right language, the right words, you know, to signal that. I mean, you know, just again, this election, you know, we talked a lot about, you know, even talk about California as being a progressive state, a blue state, a deep blue state, and all that good stuff, right? And we had, you know, the numbers to show for it. But we talk about a lot of and how we want, you know, racial, you know, justice and equality in the state. I mean, something that we all can agree on. But yet there was a proposition on the table where we could have reinstated affirmative action, you know, at the statewide level at the very least, or undo what, you know, Prop 209 did, you know, I think it was 20 years ago, and voters rejected it. You know, and that's something that we need to think about. Why was it that in this moment, when voters had the opportunity to do something legislatively to change the system in the way that we were talking about, they rejected it? You know, what was it about our communications, our messaging, our campaign? I mean, what stories did we use to articulate this one, you know, this one story that we could all see ourselves in part as part of California, like a one California, you know, family, if you will. And so, and I think, you know, and I think we made it, you know, we did a disservice to ourselves, you know, from people that believe that we need more policies like, you know, this proposition, you know, because we couldn't articulate that story well, you know, and I think that that is a problem, because again, you know, every day, everywhere you look, there will be, you know, a moment of injustice. There will be an opportunity for, again, to, you know, put somebody down and so forth, right? But if you don't have that, the narrative, you know, inside your bones, then you're gonna ignore it. You know what I'm saying? You're not gonna think about it. You're gonna just think that it's natural when it's not natural. I mean, you know, you asked a question earlier about helping each other, and I can assure you, poor people help each other more. You know, sometimes, you know, the poor are the ones that are giving, you know, they're not waiting for the cup to overfloweth. Did I say that right? I try to put the little accent in there. They're not waiting for that. they're not waiting for that. They actually, with the very little that they have, they help each other. And I know that. I've seen it. I've experienced it. Why is that? Now, why don't we talk about that more? Because that's natural. Selfishness is not natural. I think human beings helping each other, I mean, that's like our strategy for survival as a human species, right? That's natural. So why don't we elevate that?
I want to
that is
pick up
such a
on,
powerful comment. Go ahead.
yeah, I want to pick up on something Jose was talking about in regards to really California. And, some of what we really need to do is really be in community with folks who don't look like us, who are not in our socioeconomic group. Like, we need to get out of our comfort zone. The most learning that I've had is when I've been extremely uncomfortable. Like, y'all need to come to my hood. Come on down to West Oakland. And, let's walk the streets together and share with folks that are down there that are just like grinding every single day to survive. Like, that is real. But I also want to state that, like Proposition 17, which was giving formerly incarcerated individuals that had felonies the right to vote again. Like, that proposition was sponsored by the folks who were formerly incarcerated. They raised all of their resources to make that happen. Do folks know about that? Are you connected with any of those individuals? So some good stuff is happening at the grassroots level. It's bubbling up. And as Jose said, nobody is at fault because they are living in a poverty situation and they have a double whammy because they may be Black or Latino or an immigrant. And you know what? The other thing that we need to realize is that immigration and immigrants, they come in all colors. They come from many different countries. We need to stop scapegoating and really using macroaggressions and microaggressions on people who are in poverty, making assumptions about folks that we don't even know, and stop blaming people for their particular conditions. If you really want to be about what you want to be about, then get in the streets and get it together. Put your tennis shoes on, get your water bottle, and come on out and walk the street so we can change policy. And so then we can help somebody else. Because guess what? It's cold outside. We have a lot of unhoused individuals. And so you can spend $50, $60 and go get some fleece blankets, some gloves, and a hat and just pass those out. You don't have to go to a program. You can take stuff on your own. You can go get some Safeway gift cards and pass them out. Like, be about what you're gonna be about. That's what I'm about.
That is a rich comment and a real call to action. Michelle, I'm going to email you to make sure I got the 555 down so I can put that equipment in my car. But here's where I want you all to take me for a second. Part of my question, when we think about changing systems, changing behavior, even looking at some of the ballot measures, how do we continue to departisanize the conversation, right? Because it seems to have unfortunately, it's digressed to a really partisan conversation where we almost are centering political ideology instead of centering people. And so how do we reform and reshape and we reconstruct the conversation so that from both sides of the political aisle, we can recenter people and understand that that's a corporate interest, if you will, right? In the etymological sense, one body, we're all this one body, this one family. How do we take some of that that ideological divide out of it and departisanize the conversation about how we really bring structural and sustainable solutions to poverty?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely a struggle now, and it's been a struggle, for millennia. I mean, right? I mean, people at different points of history, different societies have struggled with, in doing exactly that. And I think that's something that we need to sort of, continually to struggle with. And this is where I think it kind of goes back to the idea of like, well, what are we doing here? I mean, where is this thing? Where are we? What is this thing called America? What, I don't understand what that is. What is that, right? And then we need to, this is the moment in our generation that we can redefine it yet again, right? To try to grapple with that yet again. So how do we create, e pluribus unum, right? And what does that mean for us in this day and age, in this moment in time? What does that mean to do that virtually, right? I mean, which is funny. I haven't had that thought, but anyway, but you get a point. It's like we need to do that. We need to grapple with that, and part of it is, and once we do that, then we can peel away at the partisanness, of our, but I don't know if you can attack it directly, but it's more like it's about reminding ourselves that we're in this thing together. We're in this building, this experiment, called America together, and in that America doesn't belong to any one group, any one color, any one tradition, any one region. It's like it's all of us, right? But we need the new story. So I'm really a big proponent of that, because without those stories that can guide our thinking, then we kind of fall to the default. And the default is that, white's good and all that's, that white supremacy stuff that Michelle was talking about. And then we need to combat that. But we need to replace it with something that is meaningful for us all, right? And not leave that in a void. And I think that's what we need to grapple with as a people. And the sooner we do that, the sooner we can kind of come to something that we can, where we can all see ourselves, in that story. And I think we can really, fulfill the promise of America for us all.
I love that comment. Michelle, I want you to take us and kind of build upon this direction.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the really interesting frames that Dolly Chugg talked about was being a builder. Even beyond the believer, be a builder of the kind of thing that we want to see. And one of the things that I'm curious about, look, we're talking about poverty, but what's our higher aspiration for building? And for me, I think part of it is wealth creation, right? And what would it look like to continue to set our aspiration beyond trying to lift people up out of poverty, which we know in California, that's not even a living wage. The federal poverty standard is not even a living wage in California, certainly not in the Bay Area. How do we think about taking our aspiration of building even further than that? Can you all speak a little bit about the role of wealth in the context of poverty? The absence of it is part of what a lot of folks in poverty are experiencing. And then how do we make sure that we are putting the systems in place to try to create wealth and opportunity as an avenue out? Am I asking that well?
No, that's well. So first of all, we have to get off the conveyor belt of oppression. Okay, let's just be real. We have to get off the conveyor belt of oppression. If you on the belt, you need to recognize you on the belt and come off. Walk the other way. Those little escalators that go, that take the people movers is what they call them. If you need to walk in the opposite direction of that, you need to get off. If you're not creating opportunities for families and individuals to educate them about how to attain wealth, that may be offering a class. It may be saying, you know what, you don't have a bank account. I notice that you're going to these check cashing places. It may mean saying, okay, well, let me take you to the bank. Let's find a bank that's going to work for you, because there are banks in all communities that will work for individuals. And I'm actually going to gift whatever it takes for you to open up this bank account and walk you down the path of how to create this. Let's create a budget together. Let's think about making a 1-year plan goal and a 2-year plan goal and a 3-year plan goal, and then creating the necessary tools to assist that individual and that family to be able to have hope. and take the necessary steps to be able to achieve those. So sometimes you need small wins to get there. But the ultimate thing is we do have to change systems. Our federal government, our state government, our county government, and our city government have felt that they don't have to provide any safety net services. They're all going to be on the faith community, or they're all going to be on nonprofits. No, that our tax dollars pay for the services and all of the resources that we need to be successful individuals in all of our communities, which means that we are going to have to take our voices and use our voices to bring people in policy that understands, which means that community members may have to be in policy. We need, in place for those offices. Who better to understand the solutions of poverty and how to get out of poverty than the individuals and families that are dealing with it? So we need to stop this stuff about, oh, well, just because you have this degree and you've done that, then you know what's best. No, you don't know what's best. You need to step back, move aside, and let somebody else take your spot. We just got to get us some new spots in place.
Exactly. I saw one of the activists from Moms for Housing was just elected to the city council in Oakland, right?
Carol Fife.
I love this.
Yes.
Carol Fife, absolutely. Sister Carol. Jose, I want to go back to this great point you made about the narrative, because Michelle, you're spinning a new narrative here. And Jose, I want to stay on this for a second, because there's a question in the chat. Isn't part of telling a new narrative, doesn't it also require a true and accurate accounting of our history? Yeah. Right? And so how do we balance that? You know, how do we step into an accurate reckoning of who we are and use the truth of that information as the platform upon which to build this new narrative that I think you spoke about so beautifully? How do we do that?
Yeah, I mean, this is where, this is not new. I mean, this process is actually embedded in the Bible. I mean, this is like, you have to, before you atone, you have to like recognize, your sin. You have to recognize your error. You have to recognize the bad thing that you did, and that recognition before you can, turn to a new day, right? And this is something where I think in this country, we didn't have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, like, for example, South Africa did, which I studied as a student, and I thought it was a phenomenal process that they went through as a country, as a nation, just to, heal, right? Or to try to heal as a nation. And but they did that. We didn't do it, did we? I mean, did I miss that in the history books? Was there a chapter I missed? I don't know.
Not in my classes.
Yeah, no, instead we had this thing about, the South, what was it they did? It's like, that they lost something, just like all these loony stories, conspiracy upon conspiracy stories. And then we allowed for that to take hold of our national dialogue, to the point where, there's some people that believe that the civil war was not fought because of slavery. They thought it was state rights. I mean, that's, so how could we, grapple with that? I mean, whether,
Yeah.
So anyway, I mean, I don't want to go on the path too much, but the thing is that we actually do need to do that, but what can drive us through that, painful acknowledgement is to know that at the end, we will have a new story. We will have something that can bring us together as a nation, as a society, right? That we need to do that. But we haven't yet allowed us to feel that pain as a country. And because of that, we're holding on to all those stuff that has happened, from centuries back. And that's how we ended up with, okay, I'll stop.
Yeah.
You feel me, right?
You preaching, Jose. You preaching.
It is such it's such an amazing point. And here's part of where I want to kind of bring panel 1 and panel 2 together, because part of the way that we lean into cultural competency, part of the way that we intentionally and rigorously step into becoming the person we mean to be is by continually interrogating the narratives that are around us, continually interrogating, the information that is passed down. Again, the notion of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. I mean, a lot of us would think, well, that's quintessentially American, but we never interrogate who was provided bootstraps in the first place. If I don't have shoes, I literally cannot pull myself up by my bootstraps. And there has been intentionality about literally giving boots to one group of people and withholding boots from another.
Yeah.
And those are embedded in some of our systems. And unfortunately, a lot of the connective tissue of those choices is embedded in race. So it's necessary, and it's often useful to begin if you haven't, or to continue applying a lens through which we examine racialized experiences to make sure that we have a true handle on the equity that's embedded in the system, right?
Yeah.
And so, Dolly talks about a practice where somebody was trying to reflect on their family history, which in many ways was, emblematic of the pulling yourself up by your bootstraps. And the woman did some reflections. She said, okay, what if my grandfather who pulled himself up by his bootstraps, what if he had been a different race?
Exactly. The myth of meritocracy. Right.
That's
and so
right.
I want to riff off of that because, first of all, none of us pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps. There are different types of resources that we are received from our federal government. Because when you ask folks about, well, do you receive any benefits or resources? A lot of people say no. And I'd be like, well, hold on. Are you a homeowner? Don't you receive a credit on your taxes? You have to remind folks, okay,
Right.
Are you married? Do you have children? Don't you get a tax write-off for that? Are you paying for tuition? Hey, we're all receiving benefits from the federal government. They're in many different ways. And so there is no, there should not be any hierarchy put on any individual, regardless of how they're receiving or what they're receiving, because we're all paying into the system to create a community of belonging so that all community members living on this soil can have supposedly the right and the pursuit of happiness. And so we have to do what is necessary to make that happen. And that means that we have to change all policies that are policies of oppression intentionally to move people down and to keep people down so that everybody can have an opportunity to move out of policy, create the toolkits that are necessary with the resources that are necessary to ensure that we're all equitable and we can all do what we want to do.
Michelle, I love that message. You brought us out turning the tables. Jose, I want you to take us out flipping a new narrative.
Oh. I mean, it's a new narrative, I think, but we might be surprised to find out that it's actually pretty old, and meaning that that we're still trying to understand and learn and embody the values and the lessons, that Jesus Christ was trying to teach us all, right? And so, and I think, I mean, not to try to take you all to church here, but I think, we're still trying to figure that out. But I think this is the moment where we can grapple with it in our generation, but we need to bring it to what does it mean, to the world now, and do it in a way that is honest, that is real, and that is impactful, and that brings real change to people's lives. And so, but we do need to do away with those stories that blame poverty, on the poor, or that says that, that is all about people's lack of this or lack of that is their fault of their own poverty. It's not. We all need help all the time at different points, even industries, and so forth. So I think, we need to do away with those ideas, do away with some of those notions, because they have imprison our minds, that we haven't been able to even, imagine, what this America could be like, in its full promise. And so once we do that, and then one of those ideas that have, locked our minds, imprisoned our minds, have been this notion that, of white supremacy, both for folks that consider themselves white and people that don't. That has truly imprisoned our minds. So we need to do away with that so that we can, again, realize the true promise of America.
Absolutely, Jose. I love that. I love the aspect of regrounding ourselves in an authentic faith. I often talk about Christ was the most radically inclusive cat out there.
Absolutely.
Right? And so what does it mean to live in his model and in his image, and use that as an example to author a 21st century American narrative?
Yeah.
So with that, Kathleen, I want to turn it back over to you. We went around the world here and we ended up back in church. So let's send it back to the Episcopal Impact Fund. And thank you all for being part of this conversation. I told you these two are fire. So really, really appreciate the chance to be in conversation and communion with you. Kathleen, back at you.
Thank you, everybody. That was really remarkable. It was a fascinating conversation, and I'm so grateful to all of you. And to Janelle, too. That was pretty awesome. Thank you for suggesting that we play that video, Michelle. And I'd also like to thank everyone who joined us on this Zoom webinar from home. Remember that a recording will be on our website shortly, and please invite your friends who are not here, who you think should watch this, to go on our website and take that opportunity. We hope you will join us for our third and final session of this series on December 3rd, also at 7 p.m. This topic will be, where do we go from here? And it will feature Bishop Mark Andrus and Mario Paz of the Good Samaritan Family Resource Center. Again, thank you for joining us. Thank you to Robert, to Jose, and to Michelle, and good night.